The crowd strikes and cloudy Game Pass. Happy Friday, friends. Hard to believe that July has it's basically over. It is basically over. It will end next week. August will roll in, and then we'll start talking about back to school, the holiday shopping season, and all that good stuff. Next week will also include Microsoft earnings. I believe that is on July 30th. And so we will get, that'll be the fiscal year-end numbers for Microsoft. And again, we'll get all the usual bits of data. And of course, there will be content and videos, especially on the Xbox side and Surface side. And we'll see what happens. So there you go, things to look forward to. But let's take a look at what happened this week in the world of Xbox, Microsoft, and beyond. And let's just dive in. Okay, so here we go. There's pretty big changes. I shouldn't say pretty big changes, but there's new builds of Windows 11 out that have a host of new features, including things like Emoji 15.1 support. You can now access your account manager from the start menu. You can now use your mouse to drag files in the file, between the breadcrumbs in the File Explorer address bar. You can now directly share to specific Microsoft Team channels and group chats in the Windows Share window. It's just a bunch of small refinements. You can now send emails to yourself from the Windows Share window. Windows will now back up many of your sound settings, and File, Tabs, and Explorer can now be duplicated. There are just a lot of small refinements, quality of life things, nothing major yet. We're not seeing officially any major AI features, although it looks like there might be AI stuff coming to your start menu, like AI suggestions and everything else. And so I think that's what we're going to start to see a lot of. It's no longer the algorithm that is choosing your content for you in your recommended sections. It is now the AI. So the AI will be the arbiter of whatever content gets tossed into whatever thing. You probably don't want it to be there. Microsoft is also making a pretty significant they are backtracking on the Office 365 connectors, if I can enunciate correctly here. So this was actually kind of a shock and awe, if you will, to steal a military term from the United States. They have these things called Office 365 connectors, and they do exactly what you expect to do. They allow you to connect things through Office 365. At Stardock, we use them quite a bit to bring things into Teams, notifications, alerts, that sort of stuff. And they came out like a couple weeks ago, and they're like, hey, we're going to kill all this by October 1st of 2024, and just kind of bluntly said it and didn't really think things through, which is a pretty Microsoft way to do things. And then all of a sudden, there was a significant backlash from a lot of people in the community, and Microsoft's like, ooh, maybe we did make a mistake. And here's how you know that Microsoft made a mistake. So rather than deprecating all this stuff on October 1st, 2024, which is not that far away, and even there were some earlier timelines about new stuff and everything else, they have now extended that date through December of 2025. That is how much they screwed up. They're not just delaying it a couple months, they're delaying it over 18 months effectively. Well, maybe 14, I guess, if you want to be technical about it. But either way, that's actually a really good thing because, hey, a lot of companies are using those connectors and they were just gonna slice them off and without a real clear. They're like, use Power Automate, bro. Like, just do that. Just Power Automate it all. Which I know you can, but you had this thing that worked, and then you're just saying like, hey, you've got 2 months to get rid of all of it. Hopefully, you didn't build out anything intensive because that would be bad. AMD is delaying the release of the launch of the Ryzen 9000 series chips by like 1 to 2 weeks, depending on which SKU you were looking at. It sounds like it was a quality control issue, which good for AMD for catching this prior to release. It just basically means they came out and said, look, our first batch just wasn't it. We're not going to ship those. We need to delay things, and you know what? That's fine. That is perfectly fine. Also announced this week is this little redesign that is now being tested on Bing. As nobody should be surprised by this, they're putting more AI front and center. Now, depending on how you look at this is either a good thing or a bad thing. Until it's in like a real limited preview right now. However, everybody's trying to do this, and Google is doing it in certain ways, and Bing is no different. And so what they basically have done for the people on the audio only side, you have 2 rails. You have the primary center column. I guess you technically have 3 rails. You have left, center, and right. Center is the primary content feed, and that is going to be all AI-driven stuff. The right rail will be your traditional links. Now, it's not a bad presentation. It gives you options, so that's a good thing. And it doesn't do what Google does, where, although I say that we don't see all the ads in this view right here, where Google stuff is like so far down the page that you actually want, it's becoming a pain in the butt to use, personally. But there's more interest to this than you might think. So this is what Bing announced, was this on Wednesday. And then on Thursday, OpenAI announced Search GPT, which is their own search engine. Now, it gets a little confusing because it's like, hey, isn't OpenAI using the Bing data search for their content and stuff like that on the back end? And yeah, but here's what we don't know. There's too many unknowns because the Search GPT is behind a very limited beta. You got to join a waitlist, blah, 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 that sort of thing. Now, we've all expected that OpenAI would do this, and that actually seems like the bigger threat to Google than actually Bing itself, because, hey, OpenAI has a lot of momentum, and they've got the brand recognition in the AI space. All that being said, what the point I'm trying to get to here is we don't know how they're using the Bing data on the back end, right? Is the relationship between Microsoft and OpenAI just like, hey, look, here's the data set, build your own algorithms on it, and then grab data that might actually produce different results than Bing? But the other thing that, like, the other gorilla in the room, frog on the table, whatever you want to call it, sort of thing is, did Bing just announce its stuff ahead of OpenAI because they knew OpenAI was going to announce their own search thing? I mean, like, here's the week. Bing, we have this new search AI experience. 24 hours later, OpenAI comes out and says, hey, we have a new search tool. And it sounds like did Microsoft get privy information? Like, are they front running what OpenAI is going to do? The reason why I bring that up is because it absolutely feels like that, and I think you could probably make a pretty logical case that they knew this was coming, and that's why they did this. And if you're a regulator looking at this going, like, that feels kind of anti-competitive, right? Like, if you knew what your competitors were going to announce, and now, competitors here is in quotes because Microsoft is invested, and it just doesn't feel right. And it doesn't feel like that's in the best interest of the consumer when Microsoft knows what another entrant into the market could do and disrupt things and blah, 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 and they can front run them at the end of the day. We'll see. We will see. The other massive news, which actually broke after I had already recorded last week's podcast, is CrowdStrike. And we all, there's no need to drill too deep into this. However, Microsoft has come out with some statements, but the TLDR is CrowdStrike had privileged access to the Windows operating system as a malware detection tool, or whatever you want to refer to them as a security vendor, and they shipped a bad update, and that bad update caused a lot of problems, and CrowdStrike they're in deep, right? Well, I think they said yesterday, like 97% of machines had recovered of the 8 million that were knocked offline. However, keep in mind, those 8 million that knocked offline were primarily Windows servers, and they were impacting everything from Delta flights to displays in New York Times and Times Square in New York City. And so, yeah. Anyways, Microsoft is sort of coming out here and saying, like, hey, now's the time to allow us to do this. Now, the backstory here, which most people will probably know by now, is that one of the reasons why these AV vendors can do this was because of a court ruling, I believe, out of the EU that says, hey, Microsoft, you have to give other AV vendors the same level of access to the OS as you get, so that it's an equal playing field, which at the top level feels like, hey, that's actually a pretty good thing. And considering that was 2008, 2009, I believe, might have been a little earlier than that. And we're in 2024 and it's the first time this has happened. It's like, okay, well, maybe it wasn't that bad after all. And right, maybe this shouldn't be unwound because of one bad actor. However, Microsoft's taking this opportunity to say, like, look, we need to make changes, and we can't do that without getting some bypass to those legacy rulings at the end of the day. And so Microsoft is putting out they're not quite saying like we need to remove all AV vendors and give up all control and we should be the only people in the kernel. They're not saying that directly, but they kind of are. And so this is Microsoft's start of an initiative to probably start pulling some of those guys out. Now, don't get me wrong here. Microsoft is putting this as like, we're doing this so that we don't have another meltdown CrowdStrike event again. However, at the end of the day, that still gives them a leg up and leveraged advantage in this space. So it's something to keep your eye on. And we will, we'll keep our peepers on it, if you will. So on to the gaming news, because there's always gaming news in the gaming zone or whatever. I don't know what I'm saying. Anyways, Sea of Thieves season 13 live is now live with 10 new cannon ships that can breathe fire. I'm actually super curious. I have not checked the numbers because I don't think we have a great way to do this. And somebody please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm curious what the actual usage numbers of Sea of Thieves is right now. Remember, it's now over on the PlayStation side. It's more broadly available at the end of the day. And so I'm curious to see, did this like really breathe additional life into the platform? It sold, if I remember correctly, pretty well on the PlayStation side, or at least had a good pass through to the end user. And so I'm super curious to see how well it's doing. I'm happy. Yeah, there's no reason why I want Sea of Thieves not to do well. I'm just curious, like, is this continuing to grow, and does it have a continued long shelf life? Which I hope it does. I genuinely hope it does. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, which was the least attractive title for Microsoft to put into Game Pass, is now available. And I say that a little tongue-in-cheek because that is the latest title, and I think most people have probably already bought it, right? We're at the end of the cycle here. They're already hyping up the next Black Ops. This is, I guess, a good tactical move for Microsoft in some capacity, right? It's like, we're not going to lose a whole lot of money on this one, and because people aren't buying it that at a high volume, and right, we can get people hyped for the next release, and hopefully into Game Pass and whatever. Crash Bandicoot, although is rumored to be coming in August. Now that would be awesome. I don't know if I've played any of those titles, to be honest. And so those coming to Game Pass would be of high interest. And so maybe now finally that Activision Blizzard conglomerate content machine is going to start dropping within the Game Pass, and they're going to get a hype cycle. And let's see. Also, according to Windows Central, Microsoft is reportedly exploring a cloud-only plan for Xbox Game Pass, which is... Here's my problem with this. Like, this is frustrating, not because Microsoft shouldn't do that. Like, should Microsoft have a cloud-only game plan? Yeah, they should. Why not? Why not do that? That seems to make sense. Here's the problem. Why didn't they announce it when they announced the overhaul of everything else, right? Maybe they were thinking they were announcing too many SKU changes and that would be too much confusion. But now everybody, like, they had their huge marketing beat that came with those changes, for better, for worse. Any PR is better than no PR sort of thing, even if bad PR sort of thing, if you buy into that series or thought process. But now what? Now they're going to come and say, oh, we're making another change. And it's like, guys, just make one clean change and then just do it. And it makes sense to have a cloud only, and they should have done that before, but they didn't. And now it feels like cloud continues to be, this is, I think, the bigger narrative here. Cloud continues to be the afterthought for Microsoft. We already know what's happened with Ubisoft, where they spun things out so they can get Activision done. And cloud, Microsoft has said cloud did not meet expectations, right? They canceled their Keystone device. Now, they did just do the Amazon thing. You got to give them credit for that, but that's not their own hardware. They're not really taking much risk there. It just continues to feel like cloud is an afterthought in the Xbox world now going forward. And so, yeah. So there is that. And finally for the week, now last week they did the Deadpool one. There is now a Wolverine controller with the butt. Yep, that's the only way to describe it. And I suspect that by saying this is a Wolverine controller with the butt, you all probably know exactly what I am referring to here. So, on to the questions of the week, which always are my favorite part. And so, Mr. PKI dropping it in with a couple questions this week. Mr. PKI says, CrowdStrike and Microsoft were fighting head-to-head based on the recent massive IT outage. Are we going to see Microsoft Defender gaining ground back from CrowdStrike? So, CrowdStrike, and somebody please correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. PK may be able to do this. CrowdStrike was considered best of breed, right? There's often a conversation in the IT world, like, do you stick with a stack? Like, so if you are a Microsoft user, do you stick with the whole Microsoft suite and be like, that is it? Or do you piecemeal things together, which are the best in class, right? CrowdStrike was considered to be the best product in the industry for what it did. However, we all know what's happened now. And so the question is going to come up again, like, do you stick with best of breed? Or do you switch back to just go Microsoft, one stack to rule them all, and it simplifies things a little bit for you? I will tell you the problem with the Microsoft stack is this. There's a lot of hesitation, especially in the C-suite, where it's like, do we have to give Microsoft more money? Like, it's easier sometimes to do best of breed because, like, okay, all these different vendors do different things rather than just one large chunk going to a single vendor. Also, typically by having one vendor, right, it should be easier on the support side, but anybody who's tried to get like enterprise level support from Microsoft knows how tough that will be. I do suspect that this will have more people talking about dumping CrowdStrike. Yeah, they screwed up once, but it was a monumental, massive screw up, and I do think that it will impact them, and it will give every other vendor leverage here about how they don't do what CrowdStrike does when it comes to ruining that, because, hey, CrowdStrike was deployed to stop your systems from going offline from malware, and what happened? They went offline, and so, it's just as bad in that regard. Mr. Pete Guy said, I heard there are more tiers coming to Game Pass. Is that true? Referring to what the Windows Central scoop was. They are absolutely considering it. I do know that. I know that if the information is accurate. Whether or not it's going to come to market and how and when it's going to come to market, I do not know. But it wouldn't even surprise me if they're considering additional tiers along the way, because you can imagine things like, how does a handheld, does that impact things at all too? You don't know. I don't quite know. John asks, he says, hi Brad, we know Microsoft had to sell streaming rights to Ubisoft in order to close the Activision deal. It's almost been a year and we haven't seen Ubisoft do anything with those rights. Where are the Call of Duty Diablo Cloud streaming options on Ubisoft Plus? And is there a chance Microsoft will buy those streaming rights back for certain games to put them on xCloud Gaming or Xbox Cloud Gaming? It's a good question. So just because they have the rights doesn't mean they have the technical capability yet. We don't quite know, candidly, what the back end actually needs to allow this to happen, right? Let's be real here. It took Microsoft until July of this year, just a couple days ago, to get a singular title into their own platform at the end of the day. Now, whether or not that was tactical, whether or not that was technical, we don't quite know. I suspect that getting things into Ubisoft streaming isn't just like, hey, here's the .exe file, go put it into your service and it's done. I suspect that it actually, I don't know enough about how Ubisoft Plus backend works at the end of the day to make a qualified statement about how easy it is to bring a game over. I suspect that they are trying, because if you're Ubisoft and you have these rights, maybe they're waiting for the next title. Maybe that's their big thing. But it's a good question, because again, much like the Game Pass stuff, it's taken a long time for this stuff to come to market. It really, really has. And is there any chance Microsoft will buy back those streaming rights? I sincerely doubt it. The only reason I would see that potentially happening is if Ubisoft closed their cloud streaming service and they went to market and Microsoft had to win the bidding war in some capacity. The reason why I doubt it is because you're just opening yourself up to regulatory scrutiny. Be like, hey, this was part of a deal to get this done, and now all of a sudden, whatever, pick your moniker or timeline, 36 months later, you're trying to buy it back. That was part of the deal. That doesn't make sense. And so I think Microsoft would probably try to avoid that, unless, again, it went to like a bankruptcy auction and they're like, look, we're doing this to protect our asset brand at the end of the day. So Christian says, Brad, keyboard question. Should I go full keyboard layout or should I do a smaller style? I think they're called like 68% and or whatever. What do you recommend? So I used to be a diehard, you need the full keyboard, you need the full 100%. Because there's a lot of numbers. If you are heavy into Excel, yeah, you're going to want the full size. I have grown to like, I think it's the 68%. It's a 10 keyless, a TKL keyboard is specifically the style that I use. And so I am happy with it. I think the question really becomes is like, how much do you need the numbers? Do you need the numbers? I like the smaller style. Personally, I just think it looks a little bit cleaner. But that is that. I think put more effort and thought potentially into your keycaps and switches, because that will have a much bigger impact on your typing experience rather than the size. I mean, if you have a full keyboard layout now, just get one. Get a full keyboard layout and you'll be happy with that. If you have a smaller style, like if you're coming from a laptop, like I think that's where it makes the most sense. Like if you're going from a laptop to a desktop, then you can get away without having the numbers on the side and not feel like you're in an orphan state, if you will. So I don't know. Make sure you get some good keycaps that you really like really tactical stuff, and you got to get into the nuance of like double shot. And there's specific types of double shot that I really like. I much prefer matte because over time they don't get slippery and everything else along the way. So we can go way down the keyboard rabbit hole, because keybs are fun, and keybs are the only part, much like your tires in your car, that touch the road or your fingertips. So there you go, my friends. That wraps it up for this week. A mid-July podcast, which is always can be sometimes a tough podcast because there's not a ton going on. But then you got CrowdStrike, you got Buttalicious controllers, you got a lot of other stuff going on. So as always, my friends. Oh, I forgot to say, I did solve my storage problem for streaming. So remember last week I was like, hey, SoundCloud or whatever. So I messaged them, I was like, hey, I'm not paying $150 for this. And so they gave me a 50% off coupon, which made it $75 for another year of storage with them, which to me is reasonable. So I went and paid it. I always try to advocate pay for things that you use, or pay for companies that you want to support. And I don't know if like CloudStrike is some ethical whatever company, but SoundCloud has done nothing of harm to me. And so I try to support them at $150 though, to store about 50 MP3 files. That's a lot, but 75, I did it. I bit the bullet, so nothing should change on any end. And there you go, my friends. There you go. As always, my friends, make sure to keep it subscribed here because the only BS on this podcast is me.